History of France, from prehistoric caves to modern republic. The territory known today as France occupies one of the most strategically significant positions in Western Europe, a position that has shaped its destiny for millennia. Bordered by the Atlantic Ocean to the west and the Mediterranean Sea to the south, France serves as a natural bridge between the Iberian Peninsula, the British Isles, Italy, and Central Europe. Its land borders touch Spain across the formidable Pyrenees, Italy beyond the towering Alps, and Germany, Switzerland, Belgium, and Luxembourg along its eastern and northeastern frontiers. This geographical configuration has made France both a crossroads and a contested space throughout human history. The French landscape itself tells a story of extraordinary diversity. From the rugged coastlines of Brittany to the sun-drenched beaches of the Côte d'Azur, from the snow-capped peaks of Mont Blanc to the rolling vineyards of Burgundy and Bordeaux, the territory encompasses a remarkable variety of ecosystems and climates. The great river systems, the Seine flowing through Paris to the English Channel, the Loire stretching across the heart of the country, the Garonne feeding the Atlantic, and the Rhône connecting the Alps to the Mediterranean, have served as arteries of commerce, communication, and cultural exchange since time immemorial. The fertile farmlands of the Paris Basin, the Aquitaine and Normandy, have supported dense agricultural populations for thousands of years. This combination of navigable rivers, productive farmland, natural defensive barriers, and access to both Atlantic and Mediterranean trade routes has made this territory uniquely positioned to become a major center of European civilization. The human story in this region stretches far back before recorded history. We know with certainty that modern humans, Homo sapiens, have lived in what is now France for at least 40 to 45,000 years. For a time, they shared the continent with the Neanderthals, until the latter disappeared. The communities that inhabited this land during the Upper Paleolithic left behind some of the earliest clear traces of human creativity. The famous Chauvet Cave, discovered in 1994, preserves paintings dated to around 30,000 years ago, depicting animals with striking naturalism. At Lascaux, roughly 17,000 years ago, the paintings of bulls and horses show the same artistic maturity. These well-documented remains reveal that in southwestern France there existed hunter-gatherer groups with complex symbolic and artistic practices. After the last ice age ended, around 10,000 BCE, the environment changed dramatically, and human groups adapted to these new conditions. Between 5800 and 5000 BCE, agriculture gradually spread into France, a process known as the Neolithic Revolution. The earliest farming communities, arriving via Mediterranean routes, founded small villages and began reshaping the landscape in lasting ways.
These early farmers built monuments still visible today, such as the alignments of Karnak and various dolmens and passage graves. They testify to organized communities capable of mobilizing labor for collective projects and maintaining a sedentary life. The Neolithic introduced pottery, animal husbandry, and the formation of an agricultural landscape that would remain fundamental to the region's later development. Around 2000 BCE, the Bronze Age reached France, introducing metalworking technology that had been developed in the Near East and spread gradually across Europe. Bronze tools and weapons represented a quantum leap in technology, and their production required trade networks to obtain copper and tin, which rarely occur together naturally. These expanding trade connections linked France to Britain, Iberia, Central Europe, and ultimately to the civilizations of the Eastern Mediterranean. Bronze Age cultures in France built hill forts, engaged in increasingly sophisticated warfare, and accumulated wealth in ways that created more pronounced social hierarchies. Burial practices revealed the emergence of warrior elites with elaborate graves containing bronze weapons, jewelry, and other prestige goods. The Iron Age, beginning around 800 BCE, brought even more profound changes, as iron tools and weapons, cheaper and more abundant than bronze, spread throughout the population. By the 5th century BCE, a distinctive culture had coalesced across much of France that we know through classical sources as Gaulish or Celtic. The Gauls were not a single unified people, but rather a collection of related tribes who shared linguistic and cultural similarities. Major tribal groups included the Arverni in central France, who would later produce the famous resistance leader Vercingetorix, the Aedui in Burgundy, who became early allies of Rome, the Parisi, who gave their name to Paris, the Belgi in the north, considered the fiercest warriors, and the Aquitani in the southwest, who may have been related to the ancestors of the Basques. Each tribe occupied its own territory, maintained its own government under a system of aristocratic rule or elected magistrates, and frequently warred with neighboring tribes over land, resources, and prestige.
Gaulish society was sophisticated and hierarchical. At the apex stood a warrior aristocracy who fought from horseback or chariots, displaying their wealth through elaborate metalwork, imported Mediterranean goods, and the retinues of clients and warriors they could maintain. Below them were free farmers and craftsmen, and at the bottom, slaves captured in warfare. A special class, the Druids, held religious authority and also served as judges, teachers, and repositories of oral tradition. For the Gauls deliberately refused to commit their sacred knowledge to writing, despite being familiar with writing through contacts with Mediterranean civilizations. Druids trained for decades, memorizing vast bodies of poetry, law, genealogy, and religious doctrine, and they wielded enormous influence as the only people who could move freely between tribes even during wartime. The Gauls spoke various Celtic languages related to ancient Britain, Irish, and other Celtic tongues, though these languages were not mutually intelligible. They practiced polytheistic religion centered on natural sites, sacred groves, springs, rivers, and they made offerings and sometimes human sacrifices to their gods. They built oppida, fortified towns that served as economic, political, and religious centers. The oppidum of Bibracte, capital of the Aedui, covered nearly 200 acres and housed thousands of inhabitants, with extensive workshops producing pottery, metalwork, and other goods for regional trade. The Gauls minted their own coins, traded extensively with the Mediterranean world, and developed their own distinctive artistic style, characterized by swirling abstract patterns and stylized animal forms. Greek traders and colonists had established permanent settlements on the Mediterranean coast as early as 600 BCE. Most importantly, Massalia, modern Marseille, founded by Greeks from Phocaea in Asia Minor. Massalia became a prosperous city-state that introduced Greek wine, olive cultivation, and the Greek alphabet to southern Gaul. The Greeks maintained trading relationships with inland Celtic tribes, exchanging Mediterranean luxury goods for raw materials, especially tin from Britain that was transshipped through Gaul. However, Greek influence remained largely confined to coastal regions. It was the Romans who would thoroughly transform Gaulish civilization.
Roman involvement in Gaul began in the late 2nd century BCE, when Rome established the province of Gallia Narbonensis, roughly modern Provence, as a land bridge to connect Italy with Roman territories in Spain. For decades, Romans and Gauls coexisted uneasily, with some tribes allying with Rome and others resisting Roman encroachment. Then, between 58 and 50 BCE, Julius Caesar launched a systematic conquest of all Gaul, driven by personal ambition, Roman strategic interests, and the lure of Gaulish gold and slaves. Caesar's Gallic Wars, which he chronicled in his famous Commentarii de Bello Gallico, were brutal campaigns that cost hundreds of thousands of Gaulish lives. Tribe after tribe fell to Roman legions. When Vercingetorix, a young nobleman of the Arverni, managed to unite multiple tribes in a desperate rebellion in 52 BCE, Caesar besieged him in the hilltop fortress of Alesia. After a dramatic siege involving Roman engineering works of staggering scale, Vercingetorix surrendered to save his people from starvation. He was taken to Rome, displayed in Caesar's triumph, and executed 6 years later. The Roman conquest of Gaul marked a watershed in the region's history. Over the following 5 centuries of Roman rule, Gaul underwent a profound transformation known as Romanization. This was not simply military occupation, but a complex process of cultural, linguistic, economic, and demographic change. The Romans built infrastructure on a scale the Gauls had never attempted. Roads paved with stone connecting every major settlement, aqueducts bringing fresh water to cities, amphitheaters and theaters for entertainment, bathhouses for public hygiene, and forums for commerce and governance. Cities like Lugdunum, Lyon, Lutetia, Paris, and Burdigala, Bordeaux, grew from Celtic settlements into Roman urban centers with populations in the tens of thousands. Latin became the language of administration, law, the army, and commerce. Roman citizenship was gradually extended to Gaulish elites who collaborated with Roman rule, giving them access to positions of power and prestige. The Roman educational system spread classical literature and rhetoric. Wealthy Gauls adopted Roman dress, architecture, dining customs, and cultural practices. Christianity, which arrived in Gaul in the 2nd century CE, spread gradually through urban centers and along trade routes, further binding Gaul to the broader Mediterranean world. By the 3rd century CE, Gaul had become thoroughly integrated into the Roman Empire, contributing legions to the Roman army, emperors to the Roman throne, and wealthy landowners to the Roman Senate.
Yet this Romanization was not complete cultural obliteration. The Latin that took root in Gaul was not the classical Latin of Cicero, but vulgar Latin, the everyday speech of soldiers, merchants, and common people. This vulgar Latin absorbed substrate influences from the Gaulish languages it displaced. Celtic words for agricultural terms, plants, animals, and landscape features survived into what would become French. The structure of spoken Latin in Gaul developed its own peculiarities in pronunciation and grammar, diverging gradually from the Latin spoken in Italy, Iberia, or Africa. This linguistic evolution would accelerate after Roman authority collapsed. In the 5th century CE, the Western Roman Empire disintegrated under pressure from Germanic migrations, economic crisis, and internal political fragmentation. Various Germanic peoples crossed the Rhine and established kingdoms within the former Roman provinces. Among these were the Franks, a confederation of Germanic tribes from beyond the Rhine who had sometimes served as Roman federates. In the chaos following Rome's collapse, the Frankish warlord Clovis of the Merovingian family proved particularly successful. Between approximately 481 and 511 CE, Clovis defeated rival Germanic kings, conquered the last Roman remnant in northern Gaul, and united much of the territory under his rule. Clovis's most consequential decision was his conversion to Catholic Christianity rather than the Arian Christianity practiced by most Germanic peoples. This conversion, which traditional sources date to around 496 CE, following his marriage to the Catholic Burgundian princess Clotilda, gave Clovis the crucial support of the Gallo-Roman Catholic population and the powerful Catholic bishops who effectively governed many cities. Where other Germanic kings remained isolated by religious differences from their Roman subjects, Clovis could present himself as a legitimate ruler to both Franks and Gallo-Romans. From their capital at Paris, the Merovingian dynasty would rule for over 2 centuries, though their kingdom was frequently divided among multiple heirs according to Frankish custom.
The Frankish period witnessed the gradual fusion of Germanic and Roman elements into something new. The Franks, though militarily dominant, were vastly outnumbered by the Gallo-Roman population. Rather than imposing their Germanic language, the Franks gradually adopted the Romance speech of their subjects, which was already evolving away from classical Latin. However, Frankish did contribute a significant vocabulary to the emerging language, particularly terms related to warfare, guerre from Frankish wera, governance, and feudal relationships. The Merovingians were eventually displaced by their own palace officials, the Carolingians, who seized royal power in the 8th century. Under Charlemagne, 768 to 814 CE, the Frankish realm expanded dramatically to encompass much of Western Europe, briefly recreating something like the Roman Empire. Charlemagne was crowned emperor by the Pope in 800 CE, founding what would later be called the Holy Roman Empire. The linguistic changes of this period were profound. By the 9th century, the everyday speech of people in the Frankish kingdom had evolved so far from Latin that it constituted a new language. The famous Oaths of Strasbourg, sworn in 842 CE by two of Charlemagne's grandsons, were recorded in both the Germanic language spoken in the eastern Frankish territories and in what the scribe called Romana lingua, Roman language, spoken in the west. This Romana lingua is recognizably Old French rather than Latin, marking one of the earliest written records of the French language as distinct from its Latin ancestor. Yet Latin remained the language of the church, of scholarship, of official documents and international diplomacy. This bilingual situation, with Latin for formal written purposes and French for everyday speech, would characterize France for centuries. The Carolingian Empire fragmented in the 9th century under pressure from Viking raids, Muslim incursions from Spain, and Magyar invasions from the east. The western part of the empire, corresponding roughly to modern France, became the Kingdom of the West Franks. In 987 CE, when the last Carolingian king died without a direct heir, the French nobility elected Hugh Capet, Count of Paris, as king. The Capetian dynasty he founded would rule France for over 3 centuries in direct male line and would establish cadet branches that ruled for centuries more.
However, early Capetian power was limited to a relatively small domain around Paris and Orléans. The rest of France was controlled by powerful feudal lords, the Dukes of Normandy, Aquitaine, and Burgundy, the Counts of Flanders, Toulouse, and Champagne, who were theoretically vassals of the king, but in practice ruled their territories independently and often commanded greater military and economic resources than the king himself. The medieval centuries saw the French language continue to evolve and diversify into regional dialects. The Languedoc dialects of northern France differed significantly from the Languedoc of the south, and both encompassed numerous subdialects. Yet French literature began to flourish. The late 11th century produced the Chanson de Roland, Song of Roland, an epic poem celebrating a legendary battle from Charlemagne's time, composed in Old French and representing one of the earliest masterpieces of French literature. The 12th and 13th centuries witnessed an explosion of literary creativity. The troubadours of the south of France composed sophisticated love poetry. The trouvères of the north created courtly romances about King Arthur and other heroes, and French became the language of culture and chivalry across much of Europe. The dialect of Paris and the Île-de-France gradually gained prestige as the Capetian kings slowly expanded their effective authority. The Hundred Years' War, 1337 to 1453, emerged from a complex succession dispute when the English king Edward III claimed the French throne. This devastating conflict, fought intermittently over more than a century, saw massive English victories at Crécy and Agincourt, the English occupation of Paris and much of northern France, and French fortunes at their lowest ebb. The intervention of Joan of Arc, a peasant girl who claimed divine visions, inspired French forces to break the English siege of Orléans in 1429 and facilitated the coronation of Charles VII. Though Joan herself was captured and burned at the stake by the English and their Burgundian allies, French momentum had shifted. By 1453, the English had been expelled from all French territory except Calais. The war's conclusion enabled French kings to build a more centralized state, establishing permanent taxation, a standing army, and expanding royal authority at the expense of feudal lords. The printing press, introduced to Paris in the 1470s by German printers, revolutionized the dissemination of knowledge and began the process of standardizing French spelling and grammar. The 16th century brought both the Italian Renaissance to France and the Protestant Reformation. French military campaigns in Italy exposed French elites to Renaissance art, architecture, and learning, which they enthusiastically imported. Simultaneously, Protestant ideas from Luther and especially Calvin found fertile ground in France, dividing the country along religious lines. The French Wars of Religion, 1562 to 1598, were civil wars of extraordinary brutality, including the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre of 1572, when thousands of Protestants were murdered in Paris and throughout France. Peace came only when Henry IV, a Protestant prince who converted to Catholicism to secure the throne, allegedly remarking, "Paris is worth a mass," issued the Edict of Nantes in 1598, granting limited toleration to Protestants. The 17th century witnessed France's emergence as Europe's dominant power. Under the guiding hands of Cardinal Richelieu and Cardinal Mazarin, royal authority was consolidated, and French diplomacy became paramount in European affairs. Louis XIV, who ruled from 1643 to 1715, embodied absolutist monarchy. The Sun King built the magnificent Palace of Versailles, patronized artists and writers, expanded French borders through warfare, and centralized all power in the crown. The Académie Française, founded in 1635, was tasked with regulating the French language, publishing dictionaries and grammars that established the Parisian dialect as standard French. Yet Louis's revocation of the Edict of Nantes in 1685, which ended Protestant toleration and drove tens of thousands of skilled Huguenots into exile, weakened France economically and isolated it diplomatically. The 18th century Age of Enlightenment saw French culture and the French language reach extraordinary prestige. Voltaire, Rousseau, Montesquieu, and Diderot made France the intellectual capital of Europe. French was spoken at every European court and was the international language of diplomacy and culture. Yet beneath this glittering surface, France faced severe problems. An antiquated fiscal system that exempted nobles and clergy from most taxes, combined with expensive wars and the extravagance of Versailles, created unsustainable debt. Social inequalities between the privileged orders and the Third Estate, everyone else, grew increasingly intolerable. Poor harvests in the late 1780s brought hunger to the common people.
In 1789, these accumulated tensions exploded in revolution. The calling of the Estates General, France's traditional assembly that had not met since 1614, quickly spiraled beyond royal control. The Third Estate declared itself the National Assembly. Crowds stormed the Bastille Fortress Prison on July 14, 1789, and within weeks, the feudal system was abolished. The revolutionary decade that followed witnessed the execution of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, the radical Jacobin dictatorship under Robespierre, the reign of terror that guillotined thousands, wars against coalitions of European monarchies, and finally, the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte, a Corsican artillery officer who seized power in 1799. Napoleon crowned himself emperor in 1804 and proceeded to conquer most of continental Europe, spreading revolutionary ideals and French legal codes. The Napoleonic Code remains the basis of French law today across the continent. But Napoleon's ambitions ended in disaster in Russia in 1812 and final defeat at Waterloo in 1815. The revolutionary and Napoleonic periods had lasting effects on France and Europe. They destroyed the old regime permanently, promoted meritocracy over inherited privilege, introduced mass conscription and national armies, and spread nationalist ideologies. The revolutionaries promoted linguistic unity, viewing regional languages and dialects as obstacles to national solidarity.
They mandated French education throughout the country, beginning a process that would gradually reduce the use of Breton in Brittany, Occitan in the south, Alsatian in Alsace, and other regional languages, though none disappeared entirely. The 19th century saw France cycle through different regimes: restored Bourbon monarchy, the July monarchy of Louis Philippe, the Second Republic, Napoleon's nephew's Second Empire, and finally, the Third Republic established in 1870. This political instability contrasted with rapid industrialization, colonial expansion, and cultural flourishing. France built a vast colonial empire, second only to Britain's, controlling much of West and North Africa, Indochina, and territories in the Pacific and Caribbean. Algeria, conquered beginning in 1830, was integrated as part of France itself, with European settlers, pieds noirs, establishing a colonial society that displaced and oppressed the native Muslim population. French colonial ideology justified empire through a civilizing mission that supposedly brought French culture, language, and values to colonized peoples, though the reality was often brutal exploitation.
The disaster of the Franco-Prussian War of 1870–71 shocked France. Defeated by the newly unified Germany, France lost Alsace and part of Lorraine, suffered German occupation, and faced the revolutionary Paris Commune before the Third Republic was established. The loss of Alsace-Lorraine festered as an open wound in French national consciousness and contributed to the tense international situation that exploded in 1914. World War I was catastrophic for France. Fought largely on French soil, it resulted in approximately 1.4 million French military deaths and between 300,000 and 400,000 civilian deaths, nearly an entire generation of young men. Vast areas of northeastern France became lunar landscapes of craters, trenches, and devastation. Though France was on the winning side and regained Alsace-Lorraine, the victory came at an almost unbearable cost. The interwar period saw France struggling to recover, fearing German resurgence and building the Maginot Line fortifications to prevent another invasion. These fortifications proved useless when Germany invaded in May 1940 through Belgium, bypassing the Maginot Line entirely. France collapsed in 6 weeks, a humiliation that traumatized the nation. Germany occupied the northern and western regions directly, while allowing a collaborationist government under Marshal Philippe Pétain to govern southern France from the spa town of Vichy. The Vichy regime collaborated with Nazi Germany, including in the deportation of Jews to death camps. In November 1942, Germany occupied all of France, though Vichy continued to exist as a puppet. Meanwhile, the Free French movement under Charles de Gaulle, operating from London and later Algiers, and the internal resistance fought against the occupation. France was liberated by Allied forces in 1944–45, with Paris liberated in August 1944. The aftermath of World War II saw France struggling to restore its position and identity. The Fourth Republic proved politically unstable, with frequent government changes, and faced the painful process of decolonization. Colonial wars in Indochina and especially Algeria tore French society apart. Algeria, with its large European settler population, was considered part of France itself, making its independence struggle particularly traumatic. The Algerian War, 1954–1962, killed hundreds of thousands and threatened to trigger a military coup in France itself. In 1958, Charles de Gaulle returned to power and established the Fifth Republic with a strong presidency capable of providing political stability. De Gaulle negotiated Algerian independence in 1962, ending France's colonial era.
The Fifth Republic has proven remarkably durable. France became a founding member of what evolved into the European Union, rebuilt its economy into one of Europe's strongest, developed an independent nuclear deterrent, and maintained significant global diplomatic and cultural influence. The social upheavals of May 1968, when student protests and worker strikes nearly toppled the government, reflected deep changes in French society. Recent decades have brought new challenges: economic globalization, European integration raising questions about national sovereignty, immigration from former colonies creating a multicultural society, and France's role in a world where it is no longer a superpower but remains an important voice. Today's France, with its population of approximately 67 million, represents an extraordinary synthesis of historical layers. Genetically, the French people descend primarily from the ancient Celts and Romans, who constituted the vast majority even after Germanic invasions, supplemented by later immigrations from Italy, Poland, Portugal, North Africa, and beyond. Culturally, France remains shaped by its Celtic heritage, Roman legal and administrative traditions, Germanic feudal structures, Catholic and later secular republican values, and global influences from its colonial past and present. The French language, despite centuries of standardization efforts, still preserves traces of its complex ancestry: Celtic substrate, Latin core, Germanic superstrate, and borrowings from Italian, Arabic, English, and dozens of other languages. Regional identities remain strong despite centuries of centralization. Brittany maintains Celtic cultural connections, Alsace looks to Germany as well as France, Corsica has its own distinct identity, and the South remembers its Occitan past. Regional languages, though marginalized, survive and are experiencing modest revivals. France grapples with defining French identity in an age of globalization, European integration, and multiculturalism. The legacy of colonialism shapes French relations with the developing world and creates tensions over immigration and integration. Yet France remains a major economic power, a permanent member of the UN Security Council, a nuclear power, and a country whose culture, cuisine, fashion, and intellectual life continue to influence the world.
From the cave painters of Chauvet to the philosophers of the Enlightenment, from the warriors of Alesia to the revolutionaries of 1789, from the medieval builders of Gothic cathedrals to the modern architects of the European Union, the story of France is one of continuous transformation. The land has remained, the rivers still flow, but the peoples, cultures, languages, and states that have occupied this territory have changed profoundly time and again. Understanding France means recognizing it not as an ancient, unchanging entity, but as the product of countless migrations, conquests, cultural exchanges, and political revolutions spanning over 40,000 years of human presence. The France of today, republican, secular, European, global, is merely the latest chapter in this long story. And history suggests the story is far from over.